inner peace. Part 6: The Path to True Forgiveness. A practical guide and spiritual guide for those seeking genuine release. Chapter 23: Awakening to Truth. The first step: seeing the full picture in the light. Forgiveness, according to the Grail Message, begins with a clear perception of reality. Many human beings attempt to forgive while still partially trapped in illusions, self-justifications, or emotional distortions. True release cannot occur until the soul awakens to the complete truth of a situation, its causes, the inner conditions of all involved, and the laws that govern the consequences of every action. Awakening to truth requires the lifting of the veil of subjective interpretation. Often, humans see only the surface: the hurt, the insult, the betrayal. The Grail Message emphasizes that these are external manifestations of deeper spiritual and radiational dynamics. Each offense is bound to the laws of cause and effect, attraction, and reciprocal action. By seeing the full picture, one recognizes that the offender, like oneself, acts under their own spiritual and psychological limitations. This understanding does not excuse wrongdoing, but it illuminates the reasons behind it and removes the grip of blind emotional reaction. The first step in this awakening is deliberate self-examination. The soul must inquire: what in my own inner state allowed this event to affect me so deeply? What attachments, expectations, or weaknesses of will contributed to my suffering? The Grail Message teaches that without this inner illumination, forgiveness is often superficial, a mere gesture without true radiational correction. Only by understanding one's own soul, its radiational disposition, and its interactions with the surrounding energies can a human being approach genuine release. Awakening to truth also involves recognizing the spiritual laws in operation. Every act, every thought, every word radiates and returns in accordance with divine order. By understanding that all consequences are governed by these immutable laws, the soul sees that holding on to resentment does not punish the offender but instead binds the self in chains. Forgiveness, then, is an act of alignment with these laws. It is the conscious decision to stop perpetuating inner and outer suffering. This step requires courage and honesty. It requires standing in the light of truth without shielding oneself behind pride, ego, or self-pity. The Grail Message calls it awakening to the full panorama of creation, seeing each individual as a participant in the greater spiritual order. From this perspective, offenses are no longer merely personal insults but signals, lessons, and opportunities for inner correction. Finally, awakening to truth is not a one-time event but a continuous process. Each new hurt or grievance challenges the soul to expand its awareness and deepen its understanding of spiritual realities. With every moment of conscious reflection and illumination, the soul strengthens its capacity to forgive authentically and to release the burdens that bind both heart and mind. In essence, the first step toward true forgiveness is awakening to truth, perceiving reality in its full radiational and spiritual context, understanding both self and others in the light of divine law, and seeing offenses not as personal calamities but as calls to inner growth and alignment. Only then can the soul take the initial stride toward genuine freedom, peace, and restoration. Chapter 24: The Power of Acknowledging Pain. Why Suppression Prevents Forgiveness. True forgiveness does not arise from denial or superficial platitudes. The Grail Message illuminates that human beings often attempt to suppress the memory or the feeling of pain, believing that ignoring it is equivalent to releasing it. This, however, is a fundamental misunderstanding. Suppression of pain merely buries it, allowing the radiational consequences to fester in the soul, and often erupt later in subtle or overt forms of bitterness, fear, or projection. Acknowledging pain is not indulgence in suffering, it is recognition of reality. The soul must face the hurt in its full depth, without distortion or self-deception. Each wound carries a radiational imprint, a subtle energy pattern that affects consciousness, behavior, and interactions. To ignore it is to allow that energy to remain active, unconsciously influencing thought and action. The Grail Message emphasizes that only by conscious recognition of pain can the human being begin to untangle these knots, releasing the hold that past injuries exert on the present. Acknowledgement is also a statement of truth to oneself. It requires humility to admit vulnerability, courage to face the reality of harm done, and honesty to confront both the external circumstances and one's internal responses. Pain is not shameful, it is a natural signal of human sensitivity, the soul's awareness of misalignment or violation. To suppress it, the individual pretends that inner disharmony does not exist, but in truth, the radiations of unresolved pain continue to ripple through one's spiritual field, attracting further disturbance and imbalance. The Grail Message shows that acknowledging pain is a prerequisite for transformation. Once the hurt is consciously recognized, the soul can examine it in the light of spiritual law, the causes that brought it about, the inner weaknesses it has exposed, and the lessons it offers for growth. From this understanding arises the clarity needed to forgive, not for the sake of others, but to restore the soul to harmony with creation. Forgiveness, in this sense, is a radiational correction. It releases the blocked energies of resentment, allowing them to flow in accordance with divine law, thereby restoring inner balance. Moreover, acknowledging pain allows the individual to set proper boundaries. True forgiveness does not mean allowing repeated injury. By fully recognizing and understanding the hurt, the soul gains insight into protective measures and conscious action, preventing further exploitation or harm while maintaining alignment with spiritual principles. This distinction is crucial. Forgiveness without recognition is naive. Recognition without forgiveness is self-imprisoning. In practice, acknowledging pain can take many forms: contemplative reflection, prayer, journaling, or seeking guidance through spiritual exercises. The key is sincerity. The soul must confront its hurt in truth, without rationalization or minimization. Only then does the pathway to true forgiveness open, permitting the transformation of bitterness into clarity, resentment into understanding, and inner disruption into radiational harmony. In summary, suppression of pain obstructs forgiveness, while its conscious acknowledgement empowers the soul. The Grail Message teaches that only when humans face their wounds in truth do they release the chains of resentment, align with divine law, and begin the journey toward genuine, liberating forgiveness. Chapter 25. Repentance and Recognition, the Offender's Path to Being Forgiven. Forgiveness is not only an act of the one who has been harmed, it is deeply intertwined with the consciousness and spiritual recognition of the offender. The Grail Message clarifies that the soul's purification and the restoration of harmony require that the individual who has caused harm acknowledge the wrong committed, not merely in words, but through genuine inner recognition of the consequences of their actions. True repentance is more than remorse or guilt. It is an awakening of the conscience, a conscious turning toward truth, and a realignment with the laws of creation. The offender must confront the moral and radiational consequences of their deeds, understanding how their actions have affected the victim, themselves, and the spiritual order. This recognition creates an inner tension. The realization of having violated harmony drives the soul toward correction, for the radiations of wrongdoing cannot remain without influencing the individual's own spiritual field. The Grail Message emphasizes that recognition and repentance are acts of responsibility, not punishment. The offender must see the truth without rationalization or self-justification, allowing the moral weight of their misdeed to illuminate their inner deficiencies, vanity, impatience, anger, or selfishness, that led to the act. Through this insight, the soul begins to disentangle itself from the radiational distortions caused by the wrongdoing. It is important to understand that forgiveness granted by the offended does not erase the need for inner repentance. Divine law operates through cause and effect. The action remains an imprint on the soul until it is recognized, corrected, and transformed. By truly acknowledging the misdeed and actively seeking to amend its consequences, the offender harmonizes with the spiritual laws and opens the way for forgiveness to take root. Without this recognition, any forgiveness received remains superficial, unable to restore full balance in the spiritual and radiational order. Repentance also entails a shift in consciousness, where the offender consciously resolves not to repeat the action and seeks to cultivate virtues opposite to those that led to the harm: kindness instead of cruelty, humility instead of arrogance, patience instead of impatience. This transformation radiates outward, influencing both the individual and their environment, creating conditions conducive to reconciliation and true release for both parties. The Grail Message teaches that forgiveness and repentance are thus two complementary pathways. The harmed soul releases bitterness through forgiveness, while the offender restores harmony through recognition and correction. This interplay ensures that creation's laws are maintained. Justice is not bypassed, but completed. Mercy is exercised without compromising truth, and both souls participate in spiritual elevation. In practice, repentance may manifest in sincere apologies, acts of restitution, conscious improvement in character, and consistent alignment with truth. The external gesture alone is insufficient, the inner radiational state must reflect genuine transformation. Only when recognition and repentance are authentic does the offended soul find freedom from resentment, and the offender from the moral and spiritual burden of wrongdoing. In conclusion, the path to being forgiven is paved with truth, recognition, and transformation. The Grail Message illuminates that true forgiveness is a radiational correction in the spiritual realm. The offender's acknowledgement releases the grip of past wrongdoing, restores harmony, and allows both souls to ascend in consciousness, re-establishing the balance ordained by divine law. Chapter 26. Letting go of the right to revenge, breaking the cycle of spiritual self-destruction. One of the most subtle yet corrosive traps for the human soul is the belief in the right to revenge. Many consider retaliation a natural assertion of justice or personal dignity, unaware that this very desire anchors the soul in darkness and perpetuates suffering. The Grail Message illuminates that every act of revenge is a misalignment with the divine laws of creation. It binds the spirit to negative radiations, distorts the flow of life energy, and obstructs spiritual progress. The craving for revenge arises from a false sense of entitlement. The ego, wounded by hurt, vanity, or humiliation, attempts to reclaim perceived lost honor by harming the offender. Yet in truth, this mental and emotional claim serves only to tighten chains around the one who harbors it. The radiations of wrath, hatred, and scheming flow back into the inner field of the aggrieved soul, clouding perception, weakening moral clarity, and limiting the capacity to act from truth. Each step toward retaliation compounds spiritual and radiational contamination. The Grail Message explains that holding on to revenge is a form of self-destruction. Spiritually, it obstructs the ascent of the soul, as resentment attracts influences that bind it to the offender and to past wrongdoing. Psychologically, it creates obsession, inner tension, and a sense of stagnation. Emotionally, it fosters bitterness and prevents the natural restorative flow of joy, peace, and compassion. Physically, unresolved wrath can even manifest as stress, illness, or premature exhaustion. The desire to even the score may feel justifiable, but it comes at a cost that far outweighs the perceived benefit. True liberation occurs when the soul consciously relinquishes this claim. Letting go does not imply condoning evil or surrendering moral discernment. Rather, it is an acknowledgement that revenge cannot restore the balance of creation, only the harmonization of consciousness can. By releasing the right to retaliate, the soul opens itself to higher guidance, allowing the inner light of truth to realign the radiational currents disturbed by the offense. This surrender transforms the once destructive energy into a purifying force, dissolving bitterness and clearing the path for authentic forgiveness. The Grail Message emphasizes that the release of revenge is a deliberate act of strength, not weakness. It requires courage to face the pain honestly, humility to relinquish personal pride, and faith in the justice inherent in creation. In this act, the soul participates in the higher laws, reciprocal action is honored, yet the binding grip of anger is broken. In essence, the soul chooses life over self-destruction, alignment with divine law over temporal satisfaction, and radiational clarity over darkness. Practically, this process involves several conscious steps. Recognition. Acknowledge the desire for revenge and the harm it causes the self. Reflection. Examine how the urge to retaliate originates from ego and attachment. Conscious release. Intentionally let go of the claim to retribution, redirecting energy toward inner healing. Realignment. Cultivate virtues of patience, compassion, and understanding to stabilize the radiational field. Trust in law. Surrender the situation to divine order, recognizing that creation itself balances all action with perfect justice. By performing these steps, the soul not only dissolves the radiational knots of revenge but also strengthens its spiritual resilience. The energies once wasted on resentment are redirected toward growth, service, and alignment with truth. The Grail Message reminds humanity that in letting go of the right to revenge, the human spirit gains the freedom to ascend, unburdened by the chains of its own negative impulses. In conclusion, breaking the cycle of spiritual self-destruction requires more than moral reasoning, it demands conscious spiritual action. Forgiveness, when paired with the release of revenge, restores harmony in both the inner and outer spheres, strengthens the radiational field, and allows the soul to participate in life with clarity, dignity, and alignment with the laws of creation. This is the true essence of liberation and the pathway to genuine forgiveness. Chapter 27. Invoking the Light. How prayer, humility, and surrender open the gates of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not merely a mental decision or an emotional release, it is a spiritual process that requires the alignment of the human being with the higher currents of creation. The Grail Message illuminates that the light of divine radiations is the catalyst for genuine forgiveness, dissolving inner knots of resentment, guilt, and anger, and restoring the soul to its natural state of balance. To access this light, three essential qualities must be cultivated: prayer, humility, and surrender. 1. Prayer is a radiational bridge. Prayer is more than words, it is a conscious attuning of the inner self to the higher forces of creation. When the soul invokes the light through prayer, it opens a channel for radiations that cleanse and harmonize the inner being. Prayer directs attention away from the self-centered perspective of hurt or grievance and toward the divine order. It does not demand instant emotional relief or guarantee immediate reconciliation with others. Rather, it activates a radiational flow that dissolves the rigidity of resentment, weakens the hold of ego, and permits higher guidance to enter. Through prayer, the mind becomes a receptive vessel, and the heart aligns with the vibratory currents of truth, compassion, and justice. This alignment is the first essential step in forgiveness, allowing the soul to move beyond reactive patterns and into conscious action in accordance with spiritual law. 2. Humility is the key to inner release. Humility is the recognition of one's limitations, imperfections, and interconnectedness with the greater order of creation. True humility is not self-deprecation but an acknowledgement that the human being is part of a vast spiritual tapestry, subject to forces and laws that transcend personal ego. The Grail Message teaches that without humility, the gates of forgiveness remain closed, for the ego insists on its perceived rights, on holding grievances, and on maintaining the illusion of separation from others. Humility softens the inner radiations of pride and self-righteousness, allowing the light to penetrate where resentment and indignation once reigned. It creates the inner space for understanding the offender not as an enemy but as a fellow participant in the lessons of life, and it transforms the desire for retaliation into the conscious choice for liberation. 3. Surrender is the act of trust. Surrender is the conscious relinquishment of personal control over outcomes, a recognition that the laws of creation operate with perfect justice and timing. In surrender, the human being acknowledges that attempts to force change, punish, or control others are futile and often destructive. Forgiveness, in its highest form, arises when the soul releases attachment to the outcome, leaving the balance of justice to divine law. Surrender does not equate to passivity, it is an active spiritual discipline. By releasing personal claims, the soul redirects its energy from maintaining bitterness to cultivating inner clarity, strength, and alignment with truth. The Grail Message emphasizes that through surrender, the soul participates fully in the higher currents of creation, allowing the light to correct distortions and heal radiational damage caused by offense. Integrating the three principles: prayer, humility, and surrender are not isolated practices, they are interdependent facets of the soul's alignment. Prayer opens the channel, humility clears the resistance, and surrender allows the energies to flow freely. When combined, they dissolve the radiational blockages of resentment and guilt, restore balance to the inner field, and enable the soul to extend forgiveness genuinely and powerfully. Practically, this may involve daily meditative prayer directed toward the light, honest reflection on personal shortcomings and attachments, and conscious release of the desire for retaliation or judgment. The process may take time, as deep-seated wounds require sustained alignment and consistent application of these principles. However, with patience and persistence, the soul experiences liberation, radiational clarity, and the profound peace that accompanies true forgiveness. Conclusion. The Grail Message teaches that forgiveness is not an act of weakness or mere courtesy, it is the conscious invocation of higher forces through prayer, humility, and surrender. By opening to the light, the soul dissolves the chains of resentment, harmonizes its radiations, and restores the natural flow of life energy. Forgiveness becomes not only possible but inevitable, as the soul steps fully into the currents of truth and participates in the restorative order of creation. Chapter 28. The Role of Silence, Hearing the Guidance of the Spirit in Moments of Inner Struggle. True forgiveness is a journey that takes the human being beyond the surface of emotions, thoughts, and outward actions into the profound depths of the spirit. The Grail Message reveals that silence is not merely the absence of sound but the fertile space in which the soul communes with higher currents and receives the guidance necessary to release resentment, guilt, and pain. 1. Silence is a portal to inner clarity. In the turmoil of offense, the human mind tends to replay the events, amplify grievances, and invent imagined solutions or justifications. This constant mental noise strengthens the radiational patterns of bitterness and obstructs the entry of light into the soul. Silence, by contrast, serves as a radiational clearing. It quiets the mind, diminishes egoic chatter, and allows the soul's higher perception to emerge. The Grail Message emphasizes that within silence, the inner voice of truth becomes audible. The spirit communicates not through force but through subtle radiations that guide thought, feeling, and will. Only when the human being consciously enters into this quietude can the subtle laws of creation begin their corrective work in the inner being. 2. Observing the inner struggle without attachment. Silence also enables the practice of non-reactive observation. When one faces inner turmoil, anger at an offender, grief over a loss, or shame at one's own failings, it is easy to become entangled in the reactive currents of the ego. By intentionally withdrawing into silence, the individual gains the capacity to witness these currents without becoming consumed by them. This observation is not detachment in the sense of coldness or indifference. It is a conscious recognition of the patterns that bind the soul. In observing without attachment, the soul can identify the origins of its pain, the projections of its ego, and the distortions of thought that prevent forgiveness. Silence thus acts as a mirror in which the spirit sees itself clearly, and clarity is the precursor to release. 3. Silence is a receptive channel for divine radiations. Beyond inner clarity, silence functions as a conduit for radiations of light, mercy, and understanding from higher realms. The Grail Message teaches that the soul is influenced by the radiational order of creation, and these currents cannot penetrate the tumult of noise and distraction. Only in the calm of silence can the soul absorb these currents, allowing them to correct inner distortions, dissolve resentment, and strengthen moral and spiritual resilience. Practically, this may involve daily periods of meditative quiet, contemplative walking in nature, or intentional withdrawal from conflictual situations to allow the inner being to receive guidance. Even brief moments of silence, when practiced consistently, accumulate radiational clarity that transforms inner struggle into spiritual learning. 4. Integrating silence with forgiveness practice. Silence alone does not constitute forgiveness. It must be paired with conscious willingness to release resentment and align with the truth. The Grail Message suggests that in silence, the human being may reflect on the offender, the circumstances, and the lessons to be learned, while invoking higher radiations through prayer, humility, and surrender. In these moments, forgiveness arises not as an effort of will but as the natural outcome of alignment with divine law. The soul discovers that the chains of bitterness and hatred are self-imposed and that the spirit's radiations of light have the power to dissolve them completely. Silence, therefore, is both the laboratory and the sanctuary in which genuine forgiveness is forged. Conclusion. Silence is not empty, it is pregnant with radiational opportunity. It is in silence that the spirit speaks, that inner truths emerge, and that forgiveness becomes possible. The Grail Message teaches that those who cultivate the art of listening in quietude are able to transcend the noise of grievance, perceive the hidden purpose in offenses, and open their souls to the restorative currents of creation. By entering the sanctuary of silence, the human being aligns with higher law, releases the self-imposed burdens of anger, and steps fully into the light of true forgiveness. Chapter 29. The Release. The moment true forgiveness becomes a radiational reality. Forgiveness is often spoken of as a decision, an act of will, or an emotional adjustment. The Grail Message, however, illuminates that true forgiveness is a radiational reality, a profound shift in the soul's vibrational and moral condition, a liberation that reaches beyond the mental and emotional layers to the very essence of being. It is in this release that the human spirit experiences freedom from inner chains and enters into alignment with the laws of creation. 1. Forgiveness is radiational transformation. Every act, thought, or feeling carries a radiation, a subtle emission that reflects the state of the soul. When a person clings to resentment, anger, or bitterness, these inner currents generate dense radiations that repel light, attract suffering, and strengthen karmic bonds. True forgiveness is not a compromise or an appeasement of ego, it is a transformation in which these dense radiations are dissolved and replaced by the light of understanding, mercy, and truth. This transformation is not gradual in the way of mere habit or intellectual assent, it is instantaneous when the soul aligns fully with higher currents. The Grail Message describes this moment as a radiational release. The spirit no longer vibrates in resistance but resonates in harmony with the law of reciprocity and moral order. 2. The preconditions of true release. Before this release can occur, the soul must pass through several preparatory stages. Recognition of truth. Seeing the offense and the offender in the light of justice and divine order. Acknowledgement of pain. Confronting the suffering honestly without denial or suppression. Renunciation of revenge. Relinquishing the self-imposed right to retaliate or judge. Invocation of higher guidance. Seeking the support of light, through prayer, humility, or meditative surrender. Only when these preconditions are met does forgiveness transition from a conceptual idea to a radiational reality, where the soul experiences liberation from its burdens. 3. The moment of release. The Grail Message emphasizes that the moment of true forgiveness is experienced as an inner lightening, a shift in which bitterness evaporates, clarity emerges, and the spirit feels expansively free. It may be accompanied by a sense of calm, a surprising clarity regarding the offender, or a sudden perception of the lesson inherent in the experience. This moment is not reliant on the offender's repentance or external circumstances. It is an internal liberation, fully under the control of the forgiving soul. In that instant, the radiations of the soul change, from dense, obstructive waves of resentment to flowing, luminous currents of peace, mercy, and moral power. The karmic weight is lifted, not by mere sentiment, but by alignment with the laws of creation. 4. Consequences of the release. Once forgiveness becomes a radiational reality, the soul is freed from invisible chains that bound it to the offender. Intuition and spiritual perception are restored, enabling clearer understanding of life's events. Emotional and physical burdens carried by the body and mind begin to ease. The forgiving individual radiates clarity, compassion, and strength, influencing their environment positively. The release is not merely a personal relief, it is a participation in the cosmic order, allowing the law of radiational reciprocity to act in harmony with creation. The soul, no longer a repository of negativity, becomes a conduit for higher currents that bless others and itself. Conclusion. True forgiveness is thus not a moral exercise or a social duty, it is a spiritual alchemy that transforms the inner being and reshapes the radiational field of the soul. The Grail Message teaches that to forgive in this manner is to step fully into the flow of creation, to release the self from bondage, and to radiate light where there was once darkness. The moment of release is the moment when the soul touches its own purity, and in doing so, aligns with the eternal laws that govern all life. Part 7. Living as a forgiving human being. Forgiveness is a state of being, not an occasional act. Chapter 30. The Radiant Human. Walking with clarity, strength, and uprightness. The Grail Message reveals that forgiveness, when truly understood and practiced, is not merely an occasional act or a response to specific offenses. It is a state of being, a constant radiational alignment that shapes every thought, word, and deed. The individual who lives in this state radiates clarity, strength, and moral uprightness, influencing not only personal destiny but also the environment and community around them. 1. Forgiveness is a permanent radiational state. Living as a forgiving human being means cultivating an inner field free from lingering resentment, hatred, or attachment to wrongs. In this state, the soul consistently aligns with the laws of creation, justice, reciprocity, and the attraction of homogeneous spiritual currents. Rather than waiting for circumstances to allow forgiveness, the radiant human maintains a continuous inner light, which neutralizes the effects of offense and transforms challenges into opportunities for growth. The Grail Message emphasizes that this state is not achieved through willpower alone but through sustained spiritual attunement. It is the natural consequence of a soul that has been purified, humbled, and trained to perceive life through the lens of truth rather than ego. 2. Clarity of perception. A forgiving human being sees clearly, unclouded by bitterness or judgment. This clarity is not merely intellectual but radiational, it manifests in intuition, moral discernment, and emotional stability. Clarity allows the individual to act appropriately in every situation, responding with wisdom rather than reaction. The radiant human recognizes that all actions and events are governed by divine law, and thus, offense becomes a teacher rather than a trap. 3. Strength rooted in forgiveness. True strength arises not from dominance or control but from mastery over one's inner state. The Grail Message teaches that those who forgive are powerful because they are not bound by the karmic chains of resentment. This strength is luminous rather than coercive. It manifests as calm authority, resilience in adversity, and the ability to uplift others without imposing upon them. Forgiveness becomes a source of energy, replacing the drain that grudges and bitterness create. 4. Uprightness and moral radiance. The upright human walks in alignment with the moral and spiritual laws of creation. Their conduct is guided by fairness, truthfulness, and an awareness of the spiritual consequences of all actions. By radiating forgiveness continuously, they create a field of moral harmony that protects against error, attracts benevolent influences, and encourages others to awaken to higher awareness. This uprightness is not prideful or self-conscious but natural, flowing from an internal equilibrium and connection with divine order. 5. The ripple effect of a forgiving life. When forgiveness becomes a state of being, it extends beyond the individual. The radiational field of the soul affects relationships, communities, and even the collective consciousness. Others are inspired to release grudges, to act with kindness, and to recognize the consequences of unkindness. In this way, the forgiving human contributes to a broader spiritual renewal, a living demonstration of the Grail Message in action. Conclusion. To walk as a radiant human is to embody forgiveness in every aspect of life. It is the integration of clarity, strength, and uprightness into daily existence, transforming not only the self but also the world touched by one's presence. The Grail Message teaches that this continuous state of forgiveness is the ultimate path to spiritual liberation, the gateway to inner peace, and the highest service one can render to creation. The forgiving human does not merely release the past, they illuminate the present and open the path to a harmonious future. Chapter 31. Freedom from the Past, How Forgiveness Liberates Destiny and Future Paths. The Grail Message illuminates a profound truth. The past, while immutable in its events, does not have to dictate the present or enslave the future. Unforgiveness chains the soul to memories, hurts, and grievances, creating a radiational echo that obstructs the natural flow of life and hinders spiritual growth. True forgiveness is the key that unlocks these chains, restoring freedom and allowing the soul to move unburdened into new possibilities. 1. The radiational imprisonment of the past. When a person harbors resentment, anger, or grudges, these emotions act as radiational blockages. They distort the natural harmony of the soul, attract negative forces, and perpetuate cycles of conflict. Every thought and feeling tied to unhealed offenses reinforces these invisible bonds. The past becomes a weight, limiting clarity, decision-making, and the ability to receive higher guidance. In essence, the soul becomes a prisoner of its own unresolved experiences. The Grail Message teaches that this imprisonment is not external, it is an internal misalignment with the laws of creation. Just as light cannot flow freely through opaque matter, the soul's vitality and radiations cannot express themselves fully when blocked by bitterness. 2. Forgiveness is liberation. Forgiveness dissolves the radiational cords connecting the soul to offenses and to those who caused them. It does not excuse wrongdoing, nor does it require reconciliation. Instead, it is the conscious release of the ego's claim to revenge, judgment, or ongoing grievance. By forgiving, the soul unburdens itself, restoring harmony and allowing its natural radiations to flow freely. This liberation transforms the past from a source of bondage into a reservoir of insight. Each forgiven offense becomes a lesson integrated into the soul's development, rather than a chain binding it to repetition. In this way, forgiveness is an act of spiritual sovereignty, reclaiming authority over one's own destiny. 3. Forgiveness and future alignment. The Grail Message reveals that unhealed resentment casts shadows forward in time, affecting choices, relationships, and circumstances. A person who clings to past hurts may unconsciously attract situations that replicate or echo those experiences. Forgiveness, therefore, is not only a release of the past but also a proactive alignment with the laws of creation. By forgiving, the soul establishes a radiational pattern of clarity, purity, and receptivity. This pattern attracts harmonious influences, conducive circumstances, and spiritually compatible interactions. In effect, the soul sets a trajectory for the future that is free from the distortions caused by unresolved grievances. Freedom from the past opens doors to opportunities that were previously invisible or inaccessible. 4. The inner state of freedom. A forgiving soul experiences an inner state marked by peace, calm, and certainty. It is no longer pulled backward by regrets or bitterness. Instead, the individual can make decisions grounded in truth, guided by conscience and spiritual insight rather than emotional reaction. The Grail Message emphasizes that such a state is the foundation of spiritual ascent. The soul that walks unchained from the past can rise toward higher planes, radiating light and strength to the world around it. 5. Practical steps to liberate destiny. Awareness. Recognize which past events continue to exert influence over your emotions and decisions. Acceptance. Consciously acknowledge the reality of what happened without justification or denial. Release through forgiveness. Let go of resentment and the desire for retribution, consciously choosing freedom. Integration. Extract the lessons, allowing the experiences to refine your character and enhance wisdom. Radiational renewal. Actively cultivate inner purity, gratitude, and alignment with divine law to reinforce liberated pathways. Conclusion. Freedom from the past is the reward of true forgiveness. The Grail Message teaches that when the soul releases its bonds to offense, it restores its own harmony and opens the way for a radiant future. Every step toward forgiveness is a step toward reclaiming spiritual sovereignty, awakening to higher purpose, and walking with lightness and clarity in life. Forgiveness is thus not merely a moral act, it is the doorway to destiny, the key to unburdened living, and the foundation for authentic spiritual freedom. Chapter 32. Purity in Relationships. Building connections rooted in truth, not wounds. The Grail Message illuminates the profound truth that human relationships are far more than social or emotional connections, they are energetic and spiritual interactions. Each person carries a radiational signature, shaped by inner states, choices, and moral alignment. Forgiveness, when fully realized, purifies these radiations, removing the residues of past injuries, misunderstandings, and grievances, and allowing relationships to be based on truth rather than unresolved wounds. 1. The radiational nature of relationships. Every interaction between human beings is a transfer of radiational energy. The words we speak, the thoughts we think, and the emotions we feel emit currents that influence the other person and reciprocally affect our own state. Wounds and resentment create distortion in these radiations, clouding clarity, causing misunderstandings, and attracting disharmonious experiences. Purity in relationships emerges when the soul acts from a place of inner clarity rather than reacting to past offenses. Forgiveness clears the residue of bitterness, allowing each individual to encounter others in the present moment, uncolored by history. The Grail Message emphasizes that the soul's radiations are the true medium of communication beyond words, gestures, or appearances. 2. Forgiveness is the foundation of healthy connections. Forgiveness is not limited to extraordinary events or egregious wrongs, it is the continuous practice of releasing subtle irritations, judgments, and expectations. In daily life, minor conflicts and perceived slights accumulate and, if left unresolved, can harden into invisible barriers. By consistently applying forgiveness, the soul maintains open channels, allowing relationships to thrive in light, trust, and mutual respect. A relationship rooted in forgiveness is no longer a battlefield for pride, retaliation, or control. Instead, it becomes a mirror reflecting the truth and moral clarity of each participant. The Grail Message teaches that when the ego steps aside and forgiveness guides interaction, the radiations exchanged become harmonized, nurturing growth, understanding, and spiritual alignment. 3. Distinguishing purity from naivety. Purity in relationships does not mean allowing oneself to be harmed or taken advantage of. The Grail Message clarifies that true forgiveness preserves boundaries and moral clarity. A forgiving soul recognizes wrongdoing, understands its consequences, and establishes appropriate limits, while simultaneously releasing personal resentment. In this way, forgiveness strengthens relationships rather than weakening them. It separates truth from illusion, allowing authentic connection to flourish. A relationship grounded in truth attracts harmonious forces and deters negative influences, while one built upon unhealed wounds perpetuates cycles of misunderstanding and spiritual disharmony. 4. The radiational consequences of purity. The purified radiations of a forgiving person act as a stabilizing and uplifting influence in all interactions. These radiations promote clarity, mutual respect, and goodwill, creating an environment where personal and collective growth is possible. In families, communities, and workplaces, the presence of individuals practicing forgiveness fosters cooperation, reduces conflict, and establishes moral order. The Grail Message reveals that even subtle forgiveness, applied consistently, accumulates into a radiant field that harmonizes surrounding souls. Purity in relationships, therefore, is both a personal discipline and a service to the collective spiritual order. 5. Practical steps to establish pure connections. Self-awareness. Monitor emotions, thoughts, and motivations in interactions. Recognize when past wounds influence present behavior. Active forgiveness. Consciously release resentment, judgment, or the desire for retaliation, even in subtle conflicts. Honest expression. Communicate truthfully without exaggeration or distortion, while respecting boundaries. Reflection and prayer. Seek guidance from the spiritual center within, aligning intentions with higher law. Consistent practice. Forgiveness is a continuous process, not a single act. Integrate it into daily interactions. Conclusion. Purity in relationships is the natural fruit of a forgiving heart. The Grail Message teaches that by releasing the past, clearing resentment, and radiating moral and spiritual clarity, human connections can be transformed from arenas of conflict into channels of light and growth. A soul that forgives does not merely avoid harm, it actively builds connections rooted in truth, harmony, and spiritual strength. In this way, the human being lives as a forgiving presence in the world, radiating peace and uplifting all who come near. Chapter 33. The Softening of the Will, How Forgiveness Strengthens Instead of Weakens. The Grail Message teaches that true forgiveness is a manifestation of strength, not weakness. In the human misunderstanding, forgiveness is often perceived as surrendering, yielding, or allowing oneself to be victimized. Yet this view is a fundamental distortion. The act of forgiving is not a concession to the wrongdoer but a sovereign choice of the soul to rise above the limitations of anger, resentment, and pride. 1. Forgiveness is the strengthening of will. The human will is often misjudged in terms of its capacity to dominate others, to impose personal desires, or to hold grudges. In reality, the will achieves its highest expression when it aligns with the immutable laws of creation. Forgiveness is an exercise of the will in harmony with these laws. By consciously choosing to release resentment, the soul asserts mastery over its own inner state rather than being enslaved by the reactive force of emotion. Softening the will, therefore, does not mean becoming passive or compliant. It signifies flexibility, clarity, and conscious self-mastery. Just as water softens to flow yet carves canyons over time, the forgiving will yields not to weakness but to the higher law, transforming inner rigidity into spiritual resilience. 2. The paradox of strength in release. The Grail Message reveals that the soul's attachment to wrongs, whether minor slights or deep betrayals, binds it to darkness and hinders spiritual ascent. Those who cling to resentment expend immense energy sustaining their inner chains. True forgiveness releases this energy and redirects it into constructive, life-affirming purposes. In this paradoxical manner, the softened will gains power precisely because it is no longer burdened or diverted by lower impulses. The strength of a forgiving soul is evident in its clarity of action. Decisions are no longer clouded by retaliation or fear. The spirit can respond to circumstances from a place of truth, not reaction. Here, moral courage and spiritual discernment are inseparable. The soul that forgives exercises the greatest authority over itself, unconstrained by external circumstances or the demands of the ego. 3. Forgiveness is a radiational force. Every act of forgiveness radiates a current that affects both the forgiver and the forgiven. The softening of the will produces a magnetic field of peace and strength, dissipating tension, fear, and darkness. This radiational influence is cumulative. Repeated acts of forgiveness establish a personal field that attracts clarity, guidance, and harmonious relationships. The Grail Message emphasizes that this radiational transformation is not limited to individuals. By strengthening the will through forgiveness, one contributes to the elevation of collective radiations in families, communities, and societies. The softened will becomes a channel for universal currents, harmonizing and uplifting the environment. 4. Practical application. Strengthening through forgiveness. Awareness. Recognize when the will is hardened by pride, anger, or resentment. Intentional release. Choose forgiveness consciously, seeing it as an alignment with truth rather than a concession. Reflection. Examine the spiritual benefits of release versus the hidden costs of holding grudges. Prayer and meditation. Invoke guidance from higher realms to support the surrender of resentment while maintaining inner authority. Consistent practice. Make forgiveness an ongoing habit, softening the will without weakening resolve, and transforming inner rigidity into radiant strength. Conclusion. The Grail Message teaches that the softening of the will through forgiveness is the highest form of strength. It liberates the soul, purifies radiations, and empowers the human being to live in alignment with divine law. Forgiveness is not an act of weakness but the conscious demonstration of moral courage, inner authority, and spiritual mastery. In this way, the forgiving human being stands upright in light and truth, radiating strength, clarity, and peace to the world. Chapter 34. Being an instrument of peace, radiating calm, clarity, and goodwill in the world. The Grail Message illuminates that forgiveness is not merely a personal liberation but a universal instrument. When the human being forgives, they do more than release resentment, they become a living conduit of radiational harmony, a beacon through which peace, clarity, and goodwill flow into the world. 1. Forgiveness is radiational transmission. Every thought, word, and action emits a radiation that interacts with the currents of life surrounding us. When bitterness, resentment, or anger dominates the mind, the radiations emitted are dark, heavy, and discordant. Conversely, a soul that forgives, that relinquishes the clinging to wrongs, emits light, warmth, and equilibrium. These radiations are not limited to immediate circles, they extend beyond, subtly influencing the spiritual atmosphere, softening hostility, and awakening receptivity in others. Being an instrument of peace does not require proclamation, persuasion, or public recognition. The effect is silent yet pervasive. It is the difference between a human who reacts with agitation to every insult and one who responds with equanimity. The latter does not merely avoid conflict but transforms the radiational landscape around them. 2. The relationship between inner peace and outer influence. The Grail Message emphasizes that the world's external discord mirrors inner turmoil. One cannot radiate peace while harboring unresolved resentment or unhealed wounds. By practicing true forgiveness, the individual aligns with divine law, allowing the inner light to shine undistorted. This clarity manifests externally as patience, composure, and discernment. The instrument of peace recognizes that they cannot control the actions of others, nor are they responsible for the wrongs of the world. Instead, they focus on maintaining the integrity of their own inner sphere, understanding that pure radiations influence the collective. In this way, forgiveness becomes an act of service to life itself, extending beyond the self into all relationships and environments. 3. Goodwill is a living extension of forgiveness. Forgiveness naturally cultivates goodwill. The human being who forgives does not simply tolerate, they actively wish well, radiating understanding, compassion, and encouragement. This is not sentimental or naive. It is the radiational consequence of a heart freed from the chains of resentment. The Grail Message teaches that goodwill, like light, cannot be forced or commanded. It can only flow from purity of spirit and the conscious choice to release inner darkness. In practical terms, the instrument of peace may encounter antagonism, criticism, or malice. The response, shaped by forgiveness, is to remain unshaken, to maintain calm, and to allow the higher currents of truth and harmony to flow unobstructed. In doing so, one strengthens not only the self but contributes to the collective radiational equilibrium, acting as a spiritual stabilizer in an often turbulent world. 4. Daily practice for radiating peace. Inner stillness. Begin each day with reflection or prayer, aligning with the law of forgiveness. Release grudges. Consciously let go of minor and major offenses, understanding their temporary and relative nature. Respond consciously. Replace reactive words or deeds with measured, truth-guided action. Radiational visualization. Imagine emanating calm, clarity, and goodwill to every person and situation encountered. Consistent self-observation. Monitor thoughts, ensuring they do not drift into resentment, judgment, or envy. Conclusion. The Grail Message reveals that forgiveness is not a solitary act but a permanent state of being that transforms the individual into an instrument of peace. By radiating calm, clarity, and goodwill, the forgiving human harmonizes themselves with the universal laws, elevates their surroundings, and becomes a living testament to the power of inner mastery. This is the highest calling of forgiveness, to move through the world not as a reactive participant but as a conscious, radiationally aligned channel of divine order, light, and love. Conclusion. Forgiveness is a gateway to spiritual maturity, rising in the light through release. The journey through the nature, laws, and practice of forgiveness leads to one inescapable truth: forgiveness is not optional for the human being who seeks spiritual maturity. It is the essential gateway, the spiritual threshold that must be crossed in order to ascend beyond the limitations of resentment, bitterness, and inner division. 1. Forgiveness is a pathway to inner freedom. The Grail Message teaches that every human carries within themselves the capacity for higher radiational alignment. Yet, the presence of unhealed wounds and unresolved grievances creates distortions that block the flow of divine light. Forgiveness dissolves these distortions, freeing the spirit from the chains of the past. This freedom is not a fleeting relief but a profound recalibration of the soul's vibrational and moral orientation. When the soul forgives, it consciously releases the grip of negative radiations, resentment, anger, pride, and envy. These are not simply personal burdens, they are obstacles to perceiving truth and participating fully in the higher currents of life. The act of true forgiveness elevates the human being, allowing clarity, intuition, and moral insight to function unimpeded. 2. Forgiveness is a radiational phenomenon. Forgiveness is fundamentally a radiational event. It is not merely an intellectual decision or an emotional gesture but a transformation of the invisible currents that connect all life. By forgiving, the human being becomes a transmitter of harmony, dissolving conflict not only within themselves but also in their surroundings. Radiationally, forgiveness attracts higher currents and repels darkness, establishing a balanced field in which the spirit can mature. The Grail Message underscores that these radiations are not superficial or symbolic. They are real forces, capable of influencing thought, behavior, and spiritual progress. To withhold forgiveness is to maintain a block in the circulation of life-giving currents, keeping the soul tethered to lower conditions of consciousness. To grant forgiveness is to participate actively in the ongoing renewal of creation, aligning oneself with universal order. 3. The transformative power of release. Forgiveness is also a vehicle of transformation. It does not excuse wrongs or negate justice but integrates them into the broader understanding of cause and effect, law and consequence. The human being who forgives rises above the personal drama of offense, seeing the wider structure of life and the spiritual necessity of lessons learned. Through this release, the spirit develops strength without hardness, love without attachment, and clarity without judgment. Every act of genuine forgiveness refines the soul, expanding its capacity to radiate peace, love, and truth. In this sense, forgiveness is both the gateway and the journey. It opens the path, yet walking through it transforms the traveler. 4. Forgiveness is the criterion of spiritual maturity. Ultimately, the Grail Message reveals that spiritual maturity is measured by the ability to forgive. A human being may possess knowledge, power, or influence, but without forgiveness, the soul remains fettered, unable to rise fully into light. Forgiveness is the test and the proof of alignment with divine law. Those who master forgiveness embody uprightness, purity, and responsibility. They are no longer bound by the entanglements of the ego, the weight of offense, or the illusions of retaliation. Their radiations are harmonized, their perceptions sharpened, and their lives become living examples of the divine principle of mercy coupled with justice. 5. A call to action. This book, inspired by the Grail Message, calls each reader to actively embrace forgiveness. Examine the hidden grievances within, acknowledge the pain they contain, and choose release as an act of spiritual courage. Recognize that every withheld forgiveness hinders your ascent, while every genuine act of release elevates the soul and strengthens the moral order of the world. Forgiveness is the bridge from human limitation to spiritual freedom. It is the key that unlocks inner light and aligns the human being with the eternal currents of creation. By embracing forgiveness, we rise in the light, not through power over others, but through mastery of self and the conscious participation in the laws of divine order. Epilogue. The coming purification, a humanity forced to confront its resentments in the light of the final judgment. The Grail Message speaks of a time when humanity can no longer conceal its inner distortions behind the veil of appearances, rationalizations, or distractions. The final judgment is not merely an external event but a radiational reality, the intensified illumination of truth that penetrates all hidden corners of the soul. In this light, every grievance, every withheld forgiveness, every seed of resentment is made visible, not to punish, but to clarify and purify. 1. The inevitability of purification. The laws of creation operate without bias or exception. Radiations of truth, of divine light, do not adapt to human denial. They shine impartially, revealing the inner state of every soul. Those who have clung to bitterness, harboring offenses or nurturing revenge, will experience the exposure of these currents. This is the natural process of purification. The human spirit, if unwilling to release on its own, will be confronted with the necessity of letting go. Purification is a process of illumination, not destruction. It reveals the consequences of unkind thoughts and harmful acts, allowing the individual to see the inner distortions that have accumulated over time. While this confrontation may feel intense or uncomfortable, it is ultimately a path to freedom. The final light cannot harm the spirit, it only compels alignment with universal law. 2. Resentment and its radiational consequences. Resentment is not passive. It radiates, attracting like forces and reinforcing cycles of suffering. Those who cling to resentment amplify the darkness around them, not only within themselves but in their environment. The coming purification will confront humanity with the reality of these radiations, demonstrating that no hidden bitterness remains unseen or ineffectual. The Grail Message emphasizes that these radiations are deeply entwined with destiny. The refusal to forgive, the nurturing of grudges, and the indulgence in envy or pride prevent spiritual ascent. The radiations of divine truth, intensified during this period of purification, act as a mirror, reflecting every inner obstruction to the human being, exposing the soul to the consequences of its own choices. 3. Confrontation is a catalyst for change. While the confrontation may feel like judgment, it is primarily corrective. The human being is forced to confront reality, the inner motives, unresolved conflicts, and hidden attachments that have shaped thought and action. In this confrontation lies the opportunity for transformation. The Grail Message teaches that the soul can respond in two ways, either with humility, acknowledgement, and surrender, or with resistance, clinging to ego and grievance. Those who embrace the corrective illumination experience rapid spiritual growth, as the radiations of truth catalyze release, healing, and realignment. Those who resist experience the natural consequences of their obstruction, which may include intensified suffering, isolation, or stagnation, but always in service of eventual awakening. 4. The radiational cleansing of humanity. The purification affects not only individuals but the collective field of humanity. As souls release resentment, the cumulative radiations of discord diminish. This creates a ripple effect, elevating the moral and spiritual climate of the world. Humanity is called to participate consciously, to forgive, to release, and to cultivate inner clarity before the radiational forces impose these lessons externally. Through this cleansing, the law of homogeneity asserts itself. Light attracts light, and harmony attracts harmony. The purified soul resonates with higher planes, radiates peace, and contributes to the stabilization of the human and natural order. In this way, purification is not punishment, it is the necessary restoration of balance in creation. 5. A call to embrace the coming light. The message is clear. The time for procrastination has passed. The final judgment is already in operation as a radiational force, and humanity cannot evade it. Each human being must confront inner resentment and unhealed wounds honestly, using the principles of forgiveness, humility, and spiritual alignment as tools for liberation. The Grail Message offers guidance. Through prayer, reflection, moral courage, and the willingness to release all grievances, the human being can transform what appears as a trial into a profound opportunity for spiritual ascent. The illumination will be intense, but it is also merciful. It offers clarity, renewal, and the chance to enter life as a fully harmonized, radiantly upright soul. 6. The promise beyond purification. After purification comes freedom, the liberation from the distortions that cloud perception, bind the soul, and entangle destiny. A humanity purified by confrontation with its own resentments will no longer be subject to the cycles of bitterness and retaliation. It will operate from alignment with truth, radiate justice coupled with mercy, and participate consciously in the ongoing work of creation. The final message is an exhortation: do not wait for external forces to compel release. Engage now in forgiveness, self-examination, and moral purification. Each act of conscious release prepares the soul to meet the final light not with fear, but with clarity, uprightness, and joy. In this way, the coming purification is not merely a warning, it is the gateway to a humanity reborn in radiational harmony, capable of walking consciously in the eternal currents of creation. Appendix: Practical clarifications and reflections on forgiveness. The purpose of this appendix is to provide readers with concrete illustrations, clarifications, and guidance that bridge the spiritual principles outlined in the main text with lived, practical experience. Forgiveness is not merely a theoretical concept, it is a dynamic process that affects the human being radiationally, morally, and spiritually. 1. Recognizing true forgiveness versus misconceptions. Many are led astray by popular ideas. Forgiving someone does not require forgetting, condoning wrongdoing, or immediately reconciling with the offender. True forgiveness is a radiational release, it is the letting go of inner resistance and bitterness. The distinction lies in intent. Misconception: I must forgive, therefore I must act as if nothing happened. Clarification: forgiveness is an inner alignment with truth and justice. External reconciliation may follow naturally but is not obligatory. The soul is released through conscious renunciation of resentment, not through pretending the offense never existed. Misconception: forgiveness is weakness. Clarification: genuine forgiveness is strength. It requires moral courage to confront the truth, acknowledge the hurt, and consciously release attachment to retaliation. The soul rises when it forgives, it descends when it clings to vengeance. 2. Forgiveness in daily practice. Forgiveness is cultivated in everyday situations, not only in extraordinary circumstances. Practical exercises to integrate forgiveness radiationally include: inner reflection. When confronted with hurt, pause and observe your own reactions. Identify the resentment or anger, and ask, do I wish to carry this within me, or release it in truth? Conscious release. Visualize the tension or grievance leaving the body and spirit. Imagine radiating light around the person or situation, acknowledging justice, but freeing yourself from attachment. Prayer and invocation. Seek the guidance of the Spirit. A sincere appeal for clarity and strength in letting go amplifies the radiational effect of forgiveness. These practices are not magical but operate through the natural laws of radiation and attraction. A liberated inner field attracts harmony and reduces karmic entanglement. 3. Case illustrations. Scenario 1. A colleague betrays trust repeatedly. The initial emotional reaction is anger and a desire for retaliation. By applying the principles of true forgiveness, one can release the inner chains of resentment while still establishing necessary boundaries. The radiational field of the forgiver remains strong and clear, preventing bitterness from spreading into personal or professional life. Scenario 2. A family conflict causes long-term estrangement. The wronged party may not reconcile externally, but internal forgiveness, acknowledgement of truth, release of inner judgment, and alignment with spiritual law, restores peace and health. Over time, this may naturally open channels for external reconciliation. Scenario 3. Self-forgiveness. Many carry guilt for past misdeeds. Recognizing errors, making amends where possible, and releasing self-condemnation is vital. The soul radiates clarity when self-forgiveness is practiced sincerely, breaking patterns of self-punishment and allowing growth. 4. Radiational guidance for forgiveness. Observe your radiations. Bitterness and resentment emit dark currents, forgiveness emits light. Monitor emotional and physical sensations. Inner heaviness often indicates retained resentment, while inner lightness signals release. Do not force reconciliation. External outcomes cannot dictate inner freedom. Forgiveness is an inner act first. It does not rely on the offender's awareness or response. Use silence and reflection. Many fail to forgive because the ego dominates their thought patterns. Silence allows the spirit to communicate directly with the mind, guiding toward release and illumination. 5. Encouragement and closing reflection. The path of forgiveness is gradual and requires vigilance, self-honesty, and the courage to confront one's own reactions. The Grail Message reminds humanity that the spiritual consequences of unforgiveness are profound: blocked intuition, karmic entanglements, illness, and radiational distortion. Conversely, the power of forgiveness transforms the soul, cleanses the radiational field, strengthens moral and spiritual faculties, and aligns destiny with higher law. The appendix closes with a final call. Forgiveness is not an optional virtue, it is a radiational necessity for all who seek to walk in harmony with creation. By practicing it consciously, humanity can elevate itself above cycles of pain and resentment, becoming instruments of light and channels of divine order.